Hello, everybody. This is Monica Paolini from Senza Fili, and today I'm going to talk about monetization, love, and APIs. And yes, it's not a typo. I'm really going to talk about love. So let me get started and share my slides with you. So I want to talk mostly about, I want to talk about APIs and monetization. But before I get into APIs, I want to talk about monetization per se, because to have a conceptual framework to go and talk about how monetization affects APIs. So first of all, let me introduce myself. I know a lot of people at 5G Americas. I love your meetings. So probably some of you already know me, but I'm an independent analyst at Senza Fili. And you can check me out on the website and on LinkedIn. And here you can see not only my real picture, but my Gen AI generated one, my avatar. So, okay. So as I said, I want to talk about monetization first, because whenever you talk about monetization about anything, it's a recurrent, unresolved issue that we have in wireless and to a lesser extent, but also in telecoms. And so, the same issue comes over and over again. And so I think that we need to kind of tackle that first before we talk about APIs or anything else, because otherwise, I mean, the risk is that you end up having the same conversation over and over again. So for those of you that have been in the business long enough, as I have, not everything started, but we had the first monetization issue with 3G. We have the network, great network. Can you make money out of it specifically? When it was 3G, it was actually still good, even though the technology didn't do exactly what we were expecting to do. But then with 4G, the same issue came up. With 5G, there were, huge hopes of, what is that you can do, how much, this is going to change our life. We're willing to pay all sorts of money for all sorts of services. That didn't materialize. People are happy to have a 5G phone, but not happy to pay for specific 5G service. Now, this is not just different G's, it's different things as well. So now with AI, there is a lot of expectations. You're going to make a lot of money from AI. Is that going to happen or not? And then APIs, which is what we're going to talk about today. And then my expectation is that with 6G, we're going to have exactly the same conversation over again. So the question is that what can we learn from the past so that we don't have to deal with this in the present or in the future again? How can we move forward? So, and this is when love comes in. Monetization is a very hard topic to discuss because we all want it and nobody can find it. And so, oftentimes I try to avoid it. But I had to think about it for some work that I was doing. And so here is, here are my thoughts, and they were helpful to me. I hope they're helpful to you as well. So when you think about monetization and love, there is something that they share. This is how the whole thing came about. So they both can be elusive. Everybody wants to have love, but it's hard to find. But at the same time, both money and love are good things to have in general, other things being equal. You don't want to be committing a crime to get it, but it's generally accepted. It's a good thing, but hard to find. They're not trivial. However, my argument is that love is easier than monetization. And the reason for that is that money is in tighter supply. There's just so much money that, people have in the sense that you have so much disposable income. So if I'm going to spend money on something, I typically need to not spend it on something else. It's not 100% like that, but generally speaking, you have to make a choice. So that is an issue. With love, it's a little bit different. You know, you can be more sort of generous and don't have the same constraints, and everybody's willing to, again, generally speaking, uh, to get in love, and so there is more of a willingness to do it. With money, you kind of have to fight it a bit, so you need to justify, and in general, people. You can say that a lot of people spend money, in the wrong ways, and that's a matter of opinion. But people generally do not want to open their wallet and spend money unless they see a perceived benefit. So there could be a benefit there, but they might not perceive it as such. It might be something that it's good. So when it comes to wireless services, for instance, people love to have a fast connection, the reliable connection, indoor coverage, the nicest phone, but they're not necessarily willing to pay extra for it. And so, and this is why I think that when you think about it, monetization is harder than love, because, we all need some connectivity. Nobody is giving up their phone yet. However, when it gets to new services, just because they're good, just because you love them, people, they're happy with them, they love to have them, doesn't mean that they're willing to pay for it. And I think that we need to dissociate the two. So just because technology allows us to offer a service, and just because people like it, doesn't necessarily translate in new revenues because of the tighter supply of money. And so the question we need to ask is that, is there something that people are willing to give up to pay for new service? And sometimes the answer is no. And I think that the issue here is that there is a little bit of sort of two different mindsets. There's the engineering mindset, and I'm not talking about specifically engineers, but the engineering mindset that dominates in our industry, because we love the technology. The technology is what we do. And so the engineering mindset is to make sure we have the right KPIs, the network is reliable. We love the technology. It's awesome when you think about what cellular can do, what 5G can do. It's just amazing, especially if you compare to, what we had before, which is nothing. Now, wherever you go, you're, connected. So, okay, there are some limitations, but it's excellent. And, because of that, you just want to deploy the latest technology because we love it. We want to do it. You want to do it before somebody else. We want to have the better network. It's all good, but then the subscribers have a different view, and they absolutely value connectivity is necessary. However, most of the time, people just good enough is what they need, right? And this is, if you think about it, this is why Wi-Fi is so successful. I mean, that's true that both, with Wi-Fi and cellular, you might have or might not have good coverage or whatever. But, with Wi-Fi, it's really a best effort. And yet 80% of the traffic to mobile devices goes through Wi-Fi. So clearly we're happy enough with that. And so the same goes with advanced services. If they're available for free, people will use them. And this, you see that whenever an operator deploys 4G or 5G or whatever, people start using it right away if it's free. However, it's very hard to make them pay for it. And so we need to kind of dissociate the two. It's just because something is available doesn't mean that people want to pay for it. And so we need to address that differently. Now, this brings me to another detour, and then I promise I will get and talk about APIs. Again, I've been working on wireless for a long time. So in the early days, we had revenue growth that was absolutely amazing. Now, when you go from nobody having a cell phone to everybody having a cell phone, clearly you go through stages where your yearly growth, it's huge. It's amazing. It's stunning because you grow from nobody to everybody pretty much, right? So it's a growth industry. It's a growth sector. Now, when you look at it right now, we need to recalibrate our expectations because we have become a mature industry. And it's hard because you have to go from a situation where you might have 20% growth to one where you have, like you see here, a 2.14 growth over the next 5 years, or 4.8 if you're a telecom operator. This is data from NYU and Stern. So I'm not an expert on it, but I think it's useful to look at what happens in other sectors as well, so that we can sort of recalibrate the way we think and the expectations that we might have. So, so the kind of growth that, and you know, you all know better than I do, you know, ARPUs have been stagnant or sometimes going down. So it's not, this is not real news, but to expect that the new technology is going to change this is the problem. New technology is great, and we'll get into this, but to expect that the technology itself is going to reverse this kind of trend is an unrealistic expectation, because these trends are due to macroeconomic factors which are not under our control. Our control meaning the operator or the vendor control individually or within a market. So we need to kind of manage our expectations within this limitations. And so we need to look into this and change the way we look at the future. We can differentiate ourselves. We we can try to get revenues from for competitors or from other sectors, but there are limitations to that. So now I'm going to go back to monetization. And so the way to think about monetization, when you are in a high growth sector, direct monetization, meaning new revenues, generating revenues, works perfectly well. You don't have to worry much how much you spend, because you know that you're basically using the opportunity to increase revenues because people are willing to pay more, because you have more people to use their phone, to adopt a phone and things like that. So as we move to a more mature situation, I would argue that we need to think of monetization as the creation of new financial value. So we need to focus on profitability and efficiency rather than revenue stream. And I found it useful to think about, to split monetization into two types. You have direct monetization, which is you get more money from your customers, you get new customers. Now, this is a limited opportunity, and the cost might be high because, say, you want to do network slicing, or a service that requires 5G, then you need to have a network slicing, and to have an extensive 5G network. That's expensive. And at the same time, you have low control over the outcome, because you need to convince people that not only the service is available and it works, but it's worth for them to pay for. So there is a perceived benefit there. And this is historically, we've seen that it's difficult to achieve because, initially it was easy because we had, there were a lot of people that didn't have a phone and then they got the phone. But now that everybody has a phone, that everybody has their plan, in countries like US, most people have unlimited plans, it's difficult to get there. And it depends on market dynamics. So it's a lot of it's macroeconomic, not under our direct control. Indirect monetization is a much different situation, because basically what you try to do is to adopt technology to the extent that it makes sense. And so the ROI, it's under the operator's control. And I can make the same argument for vendors to have products that fit them, this kind of situation. So basically what you do is that you increase efficiency. So for instance, 5G is more efficient than 4G. So, use it. where it makes sense, but you don't have to do everywhere. So there is wide scope for improvement, and the risk is lower because it's under your control, because you know what the increase in efficiency is if you adopt a new technology, if you adopt 5G, if you deploy 5G, if you adopt AI automation. And so you need to adopt it as needed. So we finally got to APIs. So what does it all tell us about APIs? So again, we are in a situation where it's hard. Monetization is hard. We are in a mature industry, so our expectations should be realistic. And we can think about monetization as, direct, getting more revenues from subscribers, and indirect. How does that apply to APIs? How does it help us think about APIs? Now, I think that, so from a technology point of view, I think that APIs is, it's a very easy case to make in terms of efficiency. It's a the cost of deploying, having APIs is relatively low compared to their benefits. So it just, if you look at the ROI in terms of indirect monetization, it's a good solution. So I am very, very optimistic, and I believe that our APIs are a great thing. However, I think that we want to avoid getting in a situation where the expectations are so high that, a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now, we're going to say, well, it really wasn't all what we expected for, because we need to just get the expectations right. So here I have different revenues forecasts. So let me get to that in a second. But before I do that, let me sort of go back to 5G. And the same argument that I'm going to make about 5G applies, or I think that that's the same thing that happened with 5G might happen with APIs, although to a different scale. So a lot of people think that 5G was a failure. I couldn't disagree more. It's not a perfect technology in the same way that no technology is perfect. Every technology has its own limitations. That's why we're going to have 6G, because you want to move forward. Technology is an incremental path. You improve a little bit, and then eventually, so, I don't think that as a technology is absolutely a failure. It works better than 4G. There is a lot of things that you can do with 5G that you couldn't do before. So it's awesome. The problem is not the technology, it's our expectations. When you have oversized expectations, then you're bound not to see them realized, and then you get disappointed. And they say, well, that was a failure. Well, it's not a failure of the technology. It's a failure of setting the right expectations, expecting that for, in terms of creating new revenue streams, we could do it because we just fell in love with the technology. We thought, well, we can do it. And so I think that with APIs, it's the same thing. It's like, as I said, well, you can get all this money from this, and this, and then it might just not be as much as expected. So let's go to the forecasts here. And you can see that there are different ones. You go from more conservative ones, from IDC and ABI, to the McKinsey. That McKinsey tends to be always kind of on the high end. And so, first of all, we need to ask ourselves, what is that these forecasts include? And I used to make market forecasts. I don't do them anymore. And a forecast, it's a very valuable tool. But the results depend on what your assumptions are. And because, it's also kind of hard to really measure, 5 years from now, were they right or not. So the issue is that what are the assumptions here? And like the McKinsey one, I think the reason why it's so high is because they include a lot of revenues that are actually not going to operators, and they actually do say that, because it goes to intermediaries, but also because it could be revenues that are taken from one bucket and you put it into another. So it's not new revenues, but it's just revenues that you shift from one bucket to another. And so we need to be careful about how many of these are genuine new revenues and not. But that's kind of like, so that's right there. When you look at the monetization opportunities, we need to ask, are those going to be, revenue revenues to the net to the total revenue, or are they just removing them from somewhere else and moving them there? So I think that's why there is all this disparity. Now, when we look at it, the opportunity for APIs, I think that we want to think about, again, in terms of indirect monetization. So when you look at indirect monetization, I'm going to look at it first now. APIs are really an effective technology tool to manage the complexity, the increased complexity in our networks. And the increased complexity, not only at the technology level, so at the network level, but also of the ecosystem. So there's many more players that need to talk to each other. So APIs, the way I think about APIs is just that they create a different way to connect. So it's basically in interfaces or interfacing different players, different functions. And because you no longer have just the operator, when you think about 2G or 3G, where the operator would just control everything end to end, you have so many different players that have to come together to make sure that not only the network works, but it works effectively and efficiently. So APIs are extremely valuable in terms of providing this kind of all those interfaces. And obviously 3GPP would have a lot of sort of network interfaces. This is kind of expanding that concept to a point where, and 3GPP has their own APIs, the TM Forum has its own, and GSMA. So everybody has its own different APIs, but you kind of have this kind of explosion in terms of how many APIs do you want, because you need to connect all the different parts. And in a situation where you have everything a single vendor, you have less of a need, but here you have many more players. So it's not just Open RAN, it's just basically networks, it's just network complexity. And all of this is useful because it improves network efficiency. And that's the part where the indirect monetization comes in. You improve network efficiency, and what that does, you increase profitability. And again, you can do it in a way that it's relatively low risk because you understand the technology, you understand how much gain in efficiency you can have, and you can make your decisions on whether it's worth it or not. And so it's low risk because it does not depend on macroeconomic trends, and allows you to have stronger, if you're an operator, allows you to have stronger links with the service providers, meaning content providers, application developers, hyperscalers, and also the enterprise. So everybody that is outside the wireless network infrastructure. So APIs are also extremely helpful within the operator, or to have relationships between operators, but it's also to have the link to everybody at the margin. And I say at the margin, but it's not really the margin because it's really becoming the whole service. So that is, I think, crucial. However, when we get to direct monetization, it's harder because, it's, you're not going to charge. Well, you can try, but it's unlikely that you're going to be able to get additional revenues from subscribers just because they have an API. But there is an opportunity to get revenues from ecosystem partners. So, for instance, for service provider, app providers. However, the question there is, how much money can you actually charge them for? And and how much of the revenue is going to be captured by intermediaries, because you will need, so an operator has his own APIs and they want to reach the app developer. But every operator wants to do it. So you need a marketplace, you need aggregators so that the app developers do not have to deal with each single operator. Otherwise, the cost would go up and the complexity would go up. So everybody agrees there's going to be intermediaries, and the question is that how much money intermediaries might get. And I can't remember exactly the number, but I think that McKinsey mentioned something like a third of the revenues might go there. It also going to work only if all the operators are basically on board, because if there is only one operator that has an API, that is, the value of that API to the application developer is diminished. So that's another question that it might limit or increase the revenue opportunity. But also is the value of the APIs to all those players. So, for instance, for fraud, clearly having an API that helps, say, a bank to provide protection against fraud is good, it's valuable, but at the same time, they have different ways to do it too. So the question is that how much of an advantage the API provides over alternatives, and that in turn will determine how much you're willing to pay for. So if there is no other way to do it, they are going to be willing to pay more. But if they have an alternative, well, they would. And so for instance, for location, hyperscalers have a lot of data already. So how is that going to work? So what do we want to do here is to avoid another disappointment. So we don't want to go down the same path that we went with 5G. So my view, and I'm writing a report on APIs. So this is why, sort of like I'm giving you the preview of the results that I will present in the report, is that you want to adopt APIs where you have a good business case for indirect monetization. And this is easy because, as I said, it makes a lot of sense to have APIs, even if you don't have any direct increase in the revenues, because it just increases the network efficiency. And then once you have them, and once you have them in place, you can go and reach out for any direct monetization opportunity. Because at that point, the marginal cost of doing so is low because you already have them. I mean, you already have deployed them for indirect monetization reasons. And as a result, the risk is low. So I think that here, what I'm trying to say is that do not expect that this is going to be game changing proposition. However, it's nevertheless very helpful. And so even if you're not going to get this kind of McKinsey estimates that we saw here, even if you get on the lower end, it's still good. But you're going to be much less disappointed if you don't expect to be on the high end. So this is all from me. And if you want to know more, I have here some links. If you go to the website, everything is free to download. I have a podcast that talks about monetization in more detail. and more on APIs, and there will be soon a report on this. Well, thank you so much for listening in. It was a pleasure talking to you.